So how did Liverpool and Arne Slot go from comfortably winning the league in the 2024-25 season to getting knocked out of all cup competitions by April and ultimately finding themselves battling for 5th place during the 2025-26 season? Good day everybody and welcome to another episode of TAMFC. I am your host, Nate. So in 2024, Michael Edwards makes a return to Liverpool. So as we mentioned in the previous video, Michael Edwards was previously employed by Liverpool as a sporting director, but then he got employed as the group executive, which meant that he sees to all the football portfolio related things under the FSG group. Thus, he is therefore not directly employed by Liverpool, but rather by FSG. So FSG are currently in the process of expanding their football portfolio in the European football market and moving on to a multi-club owned football structure similar to that of Bluco. So FSG also sought out to buy a decently big-sized French team called Bordeaux. This would help FSG as a whole diversify their revenue and their income and also help the group develop and sell off young, talented football prospects. Unfortunately, as of April 2026, the talks with Bordeaux have been put on ice, so for now the acquisition of another European football team has stalled. But anyways, in 2024, FSG and Michael Edwards appoint Richard Hughes as the sporting director. And a bit of a background on Richard Hughes, he's the former sporting director of Bournemouth, where he did an excellent job of keeping Bournemouth out of the relegation zone and always in and around the mid-table of the English Premier League. He also turned Bournemouth into one of the best-selling clubs in European football, where they gained a reputation of acquiring young, talented prospects and selling them for big money fees. Obviously, Michael Edwards and FSG saw Richard Hughes' potential and thought that they could fit him into the FSG and Liverpool model. Shortly after getting hired as the sporting director by Liverpool, Richard Hughes' first assignment is to find a manager to replace Jurgen Klopp. And in that time, he finds Dutch football manager Arne Slot. At the time, Slot was working at Feyenoord FC, where he won the 2022-23 Eredivisie, and after that, the Dutch KNV Cup in the 2023-24 season. And most importantly, he had a similar managerial profile to Jurgen Klopp. So because their playing styles of Arne Slot and Jurgen Klopp being so similar, obviously Richard Hughes thought that if he hired Arne Slot, it could make the transition from the previous manager more easy and seamless. Basically, Slot also plays with a high press, he played with 4 at the back, and he played with inverted wingers. The only difference though is that Arne Slot preferred a number 10 and Jurgen Klopp preferred a 3-man midfield. With many tacticians and even experts describing Slot's style of play as a mix of Jurgen Klopp's rock and roll football and Pep Guardiola's possession-based football. Slot signs for Liverpool, and I'm sure as we all know he does immensely well in his first season. He finishes top of the Champions League group format, finishes first in the Premier League and makes the League Cup final. And the interesting thing is that Slot does it with an identical squad to Jurgen Klopp, with the only difference being that Richard Hughes hires Italian international and injury-prone footballer Federico Chiesa for 10 million. I know that a lot of the media and a lot of football fans are of the opinion that Arne Slot doesn't deserve the recognition and the credit for winning the league because he did it with Klopp's team. Now, since we all have opinions on this, let me share my opinion. In an instance, if a manager wins a league and he coaches a specific club, whether he does it in a league that is dominated by a single club such as PSG in League 1 or Bayern in the Bundesliga, even in instances where all the competition is extremely weak that season, the manager still deserves credit for what he has achieved and winning the league. Because at the end of the day, that manager has to deal with specific situations, implement specific tactics, manage players. Ultimately, that manager needs to get his team to be in sync, play a specific style of football, and get the team adapted to a whole new philosophy and style of play. So with that being said, Arne Slot does in fact deserve the praise and the credit for winning the 2024-25 English Premier League. Because basically, real football isn't like FIFA or FC26, where you put a bunch of players together and all of a sudden they gel and automatically play as a team. Anyways, I digress. So for the 2024-25 season, the key takeaways are that Liverpool were defensively sound, Mohamed Salah scored a hell of a lot of goals and made a whole of a lot of assists, Szoboszlai and Gravenberch really matured, Trent Alexander had a brilliant season and became a key player again, Luis Diaz and his versatility really helped Liverpool in especially a few crucial games where he scored a lot of winners. Liverpool's number 2 goalkeeper, Kelleher, was absolutely brilliant. Van Dijk, Allison and Konate were on top of their game also. And with that being said, last season Liverpool were clearly the best team in the league and thoroughly deserved to win it. Here's where things start to get interesting. And yes, I'm talking about Arne Slot's second season in charge of Liverpool. Let's break down the 2025-26 transfer window. Liverpool ended up selling a lot of key players, including Darwin Núñez to Al Hilal, Kelleher to Brentford, loaning out Harvey Elliott in hopes that Aston Villa sign him, selling Tyler Morton to Lyon for 10 million, and selling Ben Doak for Bournemouth for 20 million. And most surprising of all was Liverpool selling Kwanzaa to Leverkusen for 30 million, which is interesting because Liverpool at the time had very limited centre-back options. Then, as we all should know, Trent Alexander-Arnold leaves on a free, and whatever you feel about that, you must understand that ultimately FSG and Richard Hughes are to blame because they should have tied up his contract much earlier and maybe try offer him a contract that he could not refuse in hopes that he didn't leave on a free. And then, in my opinion, the most impactful transfer sale of the 2025-26 season for Liverpool was Luis Diaz moving to Bayern Munich for 60 million. Obviously, Bayern Munich offered Luis Diaz a contract that he couldn't refuse, and they offered a good transfer fee to Liverpool, so it seemed like a good move for both parties. Then, unfortunately, Liverpool were hit by the death of key player Diogo Jota, as I'm sure we all must know. Now, before we go on, and I plan not to spend too long on the subject, I must stress the importance and the effect that the death had on the squad and the whole team and even all the coaches and all the staff at Liverpool. Because at the end of the day, these players and these staff members are all human and they were all probably negatively impacted. Obviously, Jota's death was bigger than football. So yeah, we just hope and pray all the best for Jota and his family. For the sake of this video, we have to admit that Liverpool did in fact have a bad 2025-26 season. But yes, ultimately we do understand that Jota's death had a massive impact on the squad. Anyways, let's look at the 2025-26 season from a financial perspective. So the season prior, Liverpool signed a massive kit and merchandise deal with Addidas to the value of £60 million, which is one of the biggest sponsorship deals in European football. And this kit and merchandise sponsorship deal actually started during the 2025-26 season. And to be honest, the shirts didn't disappoint. A straight 10 out of 10 from Addidas. Anyways, I digress. So according to this article by The Athletic, and as we previously mentioned, Liverpool's League and Champions League performances also gave Liverpool a bigger revenue and income from the previous season. Then they also increased Anfield's capacity, which meant that they got an increase to gate receipts and revenue from spectator attendances. And as per the article by The Athletic, Liverpool actually realized a massive increase in revenue in almost all of their departments, which means that the club posted their biggest ever revenue and profit in their history as per the 2025 financial statements. Now, back to the transfer activities. Now, keep in mind that the previous season, Liverpool had a net spend of 45 million. And as we mentioned in the previous video, and as per this graph, Liverpool tend to have a cyclical spending habit, meaning that Liverpool tend to spend heavy in one season, and then that season will be preluded or followed by a small spending transfer window. So keep that in mind. So in the 2025-26 transfer window, Liverpool ended with a net spend of £250 million, the biggest ever transfer window in their history, and they had the second biggest net spend only behind Arsenal. Now, according to a lot of fans and critics, this was a very different transfer window for Liverpool because although they sold a lot of players in order to buy players, they did still spend excessively, like really excessively. And I think FSG and Liverpool have only spent so excessively twice in the history. However, this summer's transfer window definitely eclipsed the 2018-2019 transfer window. Now, as a fan and a critic, I do understand that Liverpool did not spend a lot in the previous season, and that clubs do look at spending and sales across a 2 or 3 season perspective. So let's go ahead and actually rate the transfer window. But first, we have to analyze the tactics and what went wrong for Liverpool in hindsight. So I could be right, I could be wrong, Let me know what you think in the comment section. So from a tactical perspective, the first problem I would say is that Liverpool did not play with a typical number 6. And that's because last season starting number 6, Ryan Gravenberch, was allowed to roam more freely and roam forward up the pitch. And Gravenberch even admitted this in an interview.
And not like this season, we have more freedom in the midfield. Last season, I was like only on the 6, like deep, and now I can go more forward. What you see today.
The problem with this tactic is that it did leave the defense, especially the centre backs, more exposed. Secondly, we'll look at Milos Kerkez, who Richard Hughes bought from his former club Bournemouth for £45 million. And last season at Bournemouth, Milos Kerkez was deployed as an out-and-out attacking fullback who used to make tons of overlapping runs on the left channel. But during the 2025-26 season, Kerkez really stumbled during his first few months at Liverpool. Maybe it's because he was deployed more as an inverted fullback in build-up, or maybe it's because he's not used to the style of play that Liverpool use, opposed to Bournemouth, who played a very direct style of football. Overall, and especially in the beginning of the season, it didn't look like the role suited him, but I suppose towards the end of the season, he's starting to grow into that role and starting to look more and more comfortable. So overall, we'll give it a 6 out of 10 signing, and unfortunately, he didn't have a great season, but we hope he gets better. And then Liverpool go on to sign German wonderkid Florian Wirtz from Bayer Leverkusen for £100 million plus add-ons, essentially broke Liverpool's transfer spend record. Now, the problem with Florian Wirtz at Liverpool as of April 2026, he is still struggling to find his position in the team. At first, he was deployed as a number 10, and then deployed to the left wing, then to the right wing, and then back to the 10 again. And to be honest, we can all admit that he had a very tough season and a very slow start to his Liverpool career. He especially struggled with the pace and the physicality of the Premier League, but a lot of the fans and the media still believe that he is a brilliant signing in the long run because he still has loads of potential, which even Jurgen Klopp admitted in the interview with Stephen Bartlett. But we'll definitely give it a 6 out of 10 signing for this season. Then Liverpool go on to sign Florian Wirtz's teammate from Bayer Leverkusen, Jeremy Frimpong. Now, personally, in my opinion, this might probably be the worst signing of the 2025-26 season for Liverpool. And that's because at Bayer Leverkusen, Frimpong was used as an out-and-out wing-back who played with a back three. The problem with this is that Liverpool did not play with that sort of formation or ever play with a formation that resembles a back three, except for that one match against PSG in Paris. So the problem essentially with Frimpong that he is constantly in limbo between playing right wing and right back. And that till this day, nobody knows what position suits him best in the Liverpool team. And what's even more worrying is the fact that Joe Gomez and Dominic Szoboszlai started ahead of him at right back in multiple occasions. So all round, a poor signing by Richard Hughes. It gets a 2 out of 10. Then Liverpool go on to sign young Italian centre-back Leone from Parma, who unfortunately got injured in his first game of the season. So obviously we can't rate him, but we hope that he comes back and has an immediate impact. Now, the one good signing that Liverpool did make was Hugo Ekitike, who they signed from Frankfurt in Germany. And Ekitike has showed time and time again that he's an extremely intelligent player with a very bright future ahead of him. He gives a hint of Roberto Firmino with his deep-lying runs, and reminds us a bit of Daniel Sturridge because of his ability to shoot inside and outside of the box. Overall, he was a brilliant signing by Richard Hughes. He gets a 9 out of 10. Then Liverpool signed Mamardashvili from Valencia to replace Kelleher. Now, in my opinion, again, Mamardashvili is quite a decent signing, but unfortunately, Liverpool had to let Kelleher go because he said that he wanted regular game time. But unfortunately, Mamardashvili, the replacement goalkeeper, had a tough time, especially in his first few appearances for Liverpool. It definitely seems as if he's still adjusting to the Premier League, but we do think he still has a decent future ahead of him and that he showed glimpses of excellence. Overall, he is a quality goalkeeper, but unfortunately, he hasn't been performing at the level of Kelleher. So for this season, it wasn't actually a good signing. But luckily, he is a number 2, so for now, we'll give it a 6 out of 10. Finally, Richard Hughes does something very unexpected and pulls off a massive power move and signs Newcastle talisman Alexander Isak. Now, the first problem with the Alexander Isak signing is that he never actually had a pre-season. Then, tactically, the one problem that he had is that Newcastle tend to play with wingers like Harvey Barnes or Jacob Murphy, especially Jacob Murphy. Now, Liverpool do not have the same profile of players or wingers as Jacob Murphy, because last season his whole role in the club was basically to provide assists for Alexander Isak. And during the 2024-25 season, Murphy provided Isak with 7 assists. Now, the problem is Liverpool tend to play with inverted wingers or inside forwards such as Cody Gakpo, Chiesa, who are not likely to create chances for strikers, but more likely to have a shot, with the exception of Mohamed Salah, who obviously, as we all know, has got a massive reputation in not only goals, but also creating assists for teammates. Now, unfortunately for Alexander Isak, during the season, Mohamed Salah lost an immense amount of form. And finally, the final problem with Alexander Isak is that he just looked completely out of sync with all of his teammates. He looked like he didn't fit the system or the philosophy of Arne Slot, and genuinely, he looked very unfit. Overall, although he did get injured towards the middle of the season, he does look miles off the pace, and he does look like a player who has not played in a while. He doesn't look like a good fit for Liverpool and Liverpool's system, and on top of that, he has missed some inexcusable chances. In conclusion, Liverpool definitely overpaid for him, and it does look like a bit of a dud of a signing. So we'll give it a 2 out of 10. And then finally, I would say Liverpool's biggest tactical mistake, which made financial sense, was to sell Luis Diaz. Because as of the 2025-26 season, at Bayern Munich, he became one of the world's best wingers. But keep in mind that during the last season at Liverpool, he actually played a lot of the season as a makeshift number 9, which means that he played out of positions, but he was still able to make some game-changing and match-winning goals and assists. But overall, this was definitely a move that made financial sense but didn't make tactical sense. And then finally, arguably the biggest problem for Liverpool during the 2025-26 season was Mohamed Salah losing his form. Now, obviously, as we all should know, Salah looks like a shadow of the player he used to be. Obviously, he'll go down as a Liverpool legend. It's just so unfortunate that his last season he was so bad and so out of form. And a lot of critics and a lot of fans in the media have said maybe it's because he struggled without Trent Alexander-Arnold on the right-hand side, or it could be because also he couldn't gel with Liverpool's new number 10, Florian Wirtz. But ultimately, Salah losing form in the 2025-26 season was arguably the biggest contributor to the fact that they had such a bad season. Another key transfer is actually a transfer that never happened. And yes, I'm talking about the transfer of Mark Guéhi, which collapsed with Crystal Palace towards the end of the transfer window. But ultimately, and in my opinion, Liverpool would not have been on the verge of signing Mark Guéhi unless they really needed him and needed another centre-back. Because besides the fact that Leone was injured for most of the season, the biggest problem with Liverpool centre-backs is the fact that Joe Gomez often helps out and deputizes at right back, which means that the only out-and-out centre-backs in the whole squad that are regularly available are Ibrahima Konate and Virgil van Dijk. So in conclusion, what went wrong for Liverpool during the 2025-26 season, and especially with reference to the transfer window, was the fact that Liverpool sold too many players too soon, signing too many players in one window, which means that a lot of new players and a lot of the squad had to gel and first learn the new style of play, which left the whole squad in a bit of a limbo. Well, but all in all, I would say almost all of Liverpool's players have been poor this season, with the exception of Allison, Becker and Dominic Szoboszlai. And Szoboszlai thoroughly deserves 2025-26 Liverpool Player of the Season, because during the season he became an absolute Swiss Army knife. He was deployed as defensive midfielder, centre mid, attacking mid, right wing, and ultimately even right back. Ultimately, also from a managerial perspective, we must also admit that Arne Slot had a very poor season. We can also see that a lot of teams also started to figure Liverpool's style of play out, and the coach never had any real counter tactics, which Slot also admitted to himself on multiple occasions. But overall, the bad season and the bad management by Arne Slot can be put down to multiple factors, including bad game management, conceding a total of 4 league goals in stoppage time, conceding to losses and draws 11 times from winning positions in the English Premier League, not adapting his squad's tactics, and not integrating the new players adequately enough. Slot's man management was also particularly bad this season, with even Mohamed Salah coming to the media venting his frustrations at the manager. Now, from a sporting director perspective, Richard Hughes also didn't do himself any favors. In my opinion, Liverpool ultimately did have a good transfer window, but they practiced poor squad compilation. Let me explain that. Basically, the transfer window itself was good, but the way in which the sporting director and the manager were able to compile the squad together was not up to standard. And we've seen this before with the Galacticos of Real Madrid, who had brilliant transfer windows but had poor squad compilation, or Chelsea in the 2022-23 season, where they signed an immensely talented amount of players, but the squad balance was totally off. Now, Richard Hughes' first mistake was letting Trent Alexander-Arnold go on a free. Letting assistant coach Johnny Heitinga go during the 2025-26 season also never helped Liverpool. Selling Luis Diaz and not replacing him adequately. Another problem Liverpool faced was loaning out Elliott, but also not ensuring that his transfer to Aston Villa actually goes through. All in all, Harvey Elliott spent the majority of the 2025-26 season in the bench and on the reserves for Aston Villa, whereas he would have been better to just play a backup role for Liverpool because, like I said, the squad was actually lacking depth. Ultimately, and in my opinion and the opinion of a lot of fans and a lot of critics, there was not enough depth for Liverpool at centre-back, left wing, right back, which ultimately cost them during the season. But ultimately, what we do know as of April 2026 is that Michael Edwards and Richard Hughes have backed Arne Slot to keep his job, that Arne Slot's job will automatically be secured for the following season. What's interesting to note is that FSG are not historically owners who are known for firing managers regularly, but we have seen them fire a manager such as Brendan Rodgers before due to the availability of a certain Jurgen Klopp. And to make matters a little bit more interesting, we might see FSG actually finding themselves in a similar predicament because as of the 2026-27 season, there will be a plethora of top managers and coaches available. Which includes the likes of Bournemouth's Iraola, Crystal Palace's Oliver Glasner, and former Real Madrid coach and Liverpool legend Xabi Alonso. So the availability of some of these managers might just be able to twist the arm of FSG and specifically Richard Hughes and Michael Edwards, but we'll wait and see. Thank you for watching another episode of TAMFC. I am your host, Nate.